All right. Well, Pieter, while you were talking, a couple of questions were coming in. So there's one for you and one for me. So I'm going to start with the one for you since you're all warmed up. It says, thanks from Milana Mihalkovic. Thanks for great presentation, Pieter. How do you give new venture units freedom while ensuring strong linkages to the mothership?
Yeah, how we do that is while we set the strategy for the new venture, the business group that will most likely ultimately reintegrate that once the venture is fully baked and at the right scale is very involved, as well as people on the venture investing side. What I forgot to mention, I realize now, is we had already, together with the business group, made a number of startup investments in this space. So, we built up quite a bit of knowledge on what's out there in the market in the last 2-3 years. And bringing that all together, we set out on a course. Now, we also realized that probably whatever we would come up with as a strategy was not what was going to happen. And we said, okay, this is the outline, and the team now takes the helm. There is supervision by a board, Anglo-Saxon style, single-tier board, and with that, we will further work out the strategy as we go along.
So the point of connection is with the leadership of the business unit in which this thing is growing already, and they've had their own development going on, and then this investment is an embellishment there and bringing forward a new angle on the opportunity. Is that correct?
Well, I heard you speak in terms of spin out and spin in. So you could consider this a temporary spin out where those assets, that know-how was put in hologram. It will eventually, when it's at scale, most likely be spun in again, if you want to use that terminology. In the meantime, also on the venture investing side, we keep scouting for and will invest further in startups, external startups that are relevant for what is now called hologram as well. So we will keep playing all these instruments in a larger performance, if you will.
So the single tier governance that you talk about. So who are members of that governance group? Yeah,
so it's a combination. It is at this point all DSM people, but it's very senior level board members of the business group. One actually is recently retired as the head of all our nutrition businesses, but still has a very strong. I'm looking for the right word here. Commitment to DSM and the success of this venture. Somebody in one of the business groups that is on the board, a financial person, and I'm on the board as well to sort of make sure that we keep applying this startup approach, because it is a lot of money and it is always tempting, and I think history has taught us that, and I'm sure you can confirm that, Gina, that large companies don't necessarily think this way, and we know that things are going to be different than planned, and then you need to deal with it at the appropriate level.
Yeah, exactly. And so one more question, and these are coming from me. Just to follow up, I think, on this conversation. Where'd the $100 million come from? From the business unit or from a corporate group, or where do the investment dollars come from? Yeah,
this is going a little farther under the hood than I probably should talk about. We have one saying internally, which is one DSM. So DSM has committed this funding.
Yeah, and that seems to be the way it works. We cannot expect the business units who are under such pressure on certain metrics to be making these enormous investments, it seems, in terms of their own people's time. And so, unless it becomes part of the expectation that the business unit is going to be, creating its own future, in many ways. So this seems like what you're suggesting very much aligns with the conclusions that we're drawing as well. So.
Yeah, personally, I would say there's multiple ways you can skin the funding cat, but they all require a long-term commitment. And that's where this big number being out there is a clear indication of that. And then where it exactly comes from when. This is a multi-year funding plan, right? So this will be the total commitment to this startup, if you will.
And some companies do it by milestone. I mean, it's like you're putting options funding in there, not just like a huge, you can claim you've got $100 million, but you probably didn't stick it in the bank or give it over to a little.
Exactly. This is the normal startup approach,
right.
A round, B round, C round, when the company is ready for it. Exactly right. Yeah.
All right, so here's another question from Sadie, who's asking me, and Pieter, please chime in here because you've lived this. What are the usual obstacles that businesses face when scaling strategic innovations? And I mean, from what we've seen, there are many, some of which we've just described, but there's the receiving unit, the business unit, and their obstacles, which is that typically this is not on the top of their priority list. They've got their product planning, their new product development system, all the pressures with their current customers and their current markets that they've got to meet and stay ahead of the competition. And so that's one thing. But to me, one of the biggest things that I've seen is this over-constraint that's necessary for them to operate efficiently on the freedom to operate from a business model point of view. You get out there in the market and you find that the way that the market might value a novel innovation requires a completely different business model than what your business unit is used to. And further, it's not like you can depend on the sales force to do the new market creation that's required for scaling. You've seeded the market as you're incubating, you're letting the market know. But there are so many opportunities that tend to come in very strange ways that you have to kind of run down and follow through. And there's not a sales force that's willing to do that. They've got current customers, they're paid on certain incentives and all that kind of thing. So new market creation is in and of itself a whole capability that I don't think we recognize or articulate or describe very clearly. So those are a few of the many things, but it's just a mismatch of the elements of the management system, which are designed in a business unit for operational excellence and customer intimacy. That's how they compete, versus those that need to take place for innovation in a world of uncertainty, like the kind of dosed funding, Pieter, that you just mentioned, and the long-term perspective. And when we incubate these opportunities, it's not just one. There's many opportunities in a platform of business, like you're talking about with your hologram thing or the meat. So many use cases, so many applications of those technologies. And what I've seen is a business unit wants like that first easy product to be transitioned, and then we forget about all the rest of them, which is where, all the opportunity really lies. So there are a lot of tension points that have to be ironed out, either through some form of a negotiation, as you are doing, Pieter, with, the business unit leadership about how this will play out, and the funding's coming from corporate, so that really helps relieve the pressures they're under. Or you just do it in a separate acceleration. We called it an accelerator. Now that has a new term, but a separate scaling unit. And when the business can meet those metrics that the business unit's required to return, then they can pay attention when you transition it in. But not be, it's hard to expect them to do that ahead of time. So.
Yeah, I would fully echo that. And again, I heard you say now that the money comes from corporate, or again, it doesn't really matter as long as there is a clear commitment long term to that investment that will not be jeopardized by short term considerations. That's the key. I think another element which is part of what you mentioned is that what is huge for a startup is often very small for a market-leading business group, right? We have several business groups that exceed 2 billion revenues. If Hologram comes with its first I'm not going to mention amounts here, but smaller amounts, that's a big accomplishment for the startup. It is a big indicator as a milestone that Hologram is on the right track, but it's still a rounding error on the billions in the business group. So that is what you're trying to manage.
Beachhead, the way Jeffrey Moore would have called it, the beachhead. Usually it's the small niche markets that you start where they want it the most. Yeah. The killer app is a long way down the line, it seems like. Yeah. So we have one more question, but I don't know about time. So Kim, interrupt us if I'm going to go forward, and you interrupt us if we're out of time. Danfoss, Nyal Pettit from Danfoss. How important is it for you to have DSM hubs in key innovation locations and co-load these startups in these, or can it be more flexible?
Well, if you had asked me until February last year, I would have said it's really very important. I still think it's important, and proximity really helps, right? Because often the human trust levels that you need to do this and to see it through when everything changes, which it always does, is critical. But I think we've all learned now and accelerated our learning, including within the corporation, actually, to work remotely. So I think having hubs is important, whether you actually co-locate in your own space or in a shared space, or you do it on temporary basis. I think there's a lot more flexibility and less rigidity in my answer now than there would have been then.
Okay. All right. Well, Kim, are we out of time? I don't know if somebody's still scribing over here. Pieter, do you have any questions for me? Or?
No, well, we had a short chat to prepare this, but I hadn't really heard your presentation yet. So I'm always curious to see if you think we've overlooked ways of doing this, the way we're doing it now, that are really glaring at you when you hear this story.
I think the main thing is, are there room for unaligned opportunities? Or does it have to go to a business unit? That would be the main thing I would have picked up after listening to you for 10 minutes today and 20 minutes on Friday. But obviously, as you said, we have to dig a lot deeper. But DSM has been one of my heroes, as you know, since you guys participated in the third phase of our research, and we learned a lot from you. And so going from this, you guys accelerated in the Innovation Center. And what you're telling me now is, you're taking yet a different approach, another approach. And companies are always doing that. But I think once we get these principles of discovery, incubation, acceleration, how we do them really well in corporates, because as you've mentioned, it got too bogged down. And then how we think about it from a leadership point of view and the governance and the support system. Those are principles that are not glitzy, sexy, new program of the month. This is how you build a capability that has to have staying power. And I think what you guys are doing, you are at the forefront here. So.
Yeah.
But we can talk poolside because I'll be over in Boston in a couple of weeks.
No, that sounds like fun. Let's do that. I think where we are right now. I mean, I've been in business now for over 30 years. Pendulums do swing, right? I think the appetite to go way out of where the current businesses have their strategy going is right now lower than it may have been, before. And so I think the majority of what we do now in terms of new business, innovation, business building, as well as venturing, there is a hypothesis when we do it where it will land. Now, we also know that the cycles in business, are shorter than often these startups mature. So I think it's critically important the moment you've embarked on that journey to build a business that other people will put value on as well, not just your own mothership. And that's just common sense and good hygiene, I think, for where you're investing your money. And that's very much an approach we're taking as well. So we're trying to be very mindful of how the rest of the world thinks about these ventures. And sometimes it's part of the business model, actually, to valorize some of these things en route.
Yeah.
All right, Gina and Pieter, I have to stop you right here. We wish we could have had more time, but thank you so much again for joining us today. It was really interesting listening to both of you. And also, I'd like to highlight our Ashton that has been drawing during this fireside chat from Mindset Creative Consulting. All right, and thank you so much again, Gina, Pieter, and of course, Ashton.
Thank you.